All right, welcome back everybody. So in this video, I'm going to be explaining about the four types of sentences. We have four types, which are simple sentences, which are comprised of one clause. And a reminder, a clause is a subject-verb group. Compound sentences, which combine an independent clause with an independent clause. Complex sentences, which combine an independent clause with a dependent clause. And finally, compound complex sentences, which combine at least two independent clauses with one or more dependent clauses. Simple sentences. Let's look at in detail at what simple sentences are and how they are composed. So we have four types of simple sentences in English. So the simplest one is where you have one subject and one verb. For example, you have Jonas read his book. Jonas is the subject, the verb is read. Here you have one person, and this person did only one action. So we have subject and verb combination, and this is the simplest of the simple sentences that we have. Then we have the second type, which is where you have one subject that does two different actions. For example, Jonas read his book and did his homework. Jonas is the subject, and the two actions that Jonas did were reading his book and doing his homework. So we have two actions, but one subject, and again, we have a simple sentence. The third type is where we have two subjects, but both of these subjects do the same action. So for example, Jonas and Caroline read their books. Here we have two subjects, Jonas and Caroline, and they both did the same thing. They both read their books. And finally, we have the situation where we have two subjects, but each one of these subjects did the same two actions as the other. For example, Jonas and Caroline read their books and did their homework. So the subjects are Jonas and Caroline. What did Jonas do? He read his book and he did his homework. Okay, what did Caroline do? She did the same two actions. She also read her book and she did her homework. So even though we have two subjects and two verbs, we still have a simple sentence because the two subjects that we have, each one of them does the same two actions as the other. So again, it's a simple sentence. Next, we have compound sentences. Now, a compound sentence is when we have two independent clauses joined together. For example, Jonas read his book and his sister watched watched TV. Here we have two independent clauses. And the reason we say they're independent is because each one can be a standalone sentence. I can say Jonas read his book and stop. And that would make perfect sense and it would be grammatically correct. I don't need any more information to understand the idea. The idea is complete. So it's an independent clause, and the same thing for the second clause, his sister watched TV. Now, independent clauses can be joined in one of three ways. The first way is through a coordinating conjunction. We have 7 coordinating conjunctions in English, which are commonly referred to as fanboys. Fanboys is an acronym for F is for, A for and, N for nor, B for but, O for are, Y for yet, and S for so. These are 7 coordinating conjunctions, and there's no other. So when you see one of these coordinating conjunctions connecting two independent clauses, automatically you can safely assume that it's a compound sentence. In this example we have, the author did not like the book, but the fans loved it. So the author did not like the book is an independent, the fans loved it is also an independent, and they're joined together by but. Now the thing to remember here is, when you use a coordinating conjunction, you must use a comma beforehand. The second way to connect two independent clauses is via a semicolon. Now, when we use a semicolon, you have to make sure that the two ideas are related. They make sense. They're somehow connected. For example, the student kept talking, semicolon, he got in trouble. So again, I have two clauses. Each clause has a subject-verb group. Now, why are these connected by a semicolon? Well, he got in trouble because he was talking. So it was a result of the first action. The first action happened, he kept talking. The second action followed as a result, which is him getting into trouble. So those two clauses are cause and effect, and that's why they're joined by a semicolon. The third way to combine two independent clauses is via a conjunctive adverb. And here it's a very similar idea to the semicolon, but here it's a little bit easier because you can actually add a word to explain the relationship between the two clauses. For example, it started to rain, semicolon, therefore, comma, we decided to bring our umbrellas. When we use the word therefore, it becomes very clear that we brought our umbrellas because it started to rain. So us bringing the umbrellas is a result of the rain. There are many conjunctive adverbs that you can use. Another one that you could use here is, it started to rain, semicolon, consequently, we decided to bring our umbrellas. Again, you have to pay attention to the punctuation. When you use a conjunctive adverb, you have to use a semicolon before and a comma after. Next, we have complex sentences. Now, a complex sentence is made up of an independent clause joined with a dependent clause. For example, Jordan stayed home because he was feeling sick. So Jordan stayed home is the independent. Why did he stay home? Because he was feeling sick. So that's the dependent clause. Now, the nice thing with complex sentences is that you can start with the dependent and follow that with the independent clause. For example, because he was feeling sick, Jordan stayed home. In this example, we start with the dependent and we follow it with the independent clause. The thing to remember is if you decide to start with the dependent clause, you must put a comma to separate the dependent from the independent clause. The way to join the dependent and the independent clauses is via a subordinator. There are many subordinators in English, for example, because, before, while, although, and there's many more. Let's take a look at the examples. Although the author did not like the book, the fans loved it. Stay at home until the family arrives. And finally, when the cake is brown, take it out of the oven. In each one of these three sentences, the dependent clause starts with the subordinator. And remember, if you start your sentence with the dependent clause, you must insert a comma to separate the dependent from the independent clause. And some common subordinators in English are, some are used for contrast, like whereas, although, while, even though. For cause effect, like because and since. There's some time subordinators, before, after, as soon as, whenever, and condition, if, unless. Now there's a lot more. This here is just a brief examples of just the most common ones, but there's a lot more and they each serve a different function. It's a good idea to familiarize yourself with the different ones. Finally, we have compound complex sentences. So compound complex sentences, as the name might suggest, is a combination of compound and complex sentences. What does that mean? That means we must have at least two or more independent clauses combined with at least one dependent clause. For example, though he disliked maths, comma, he worked very hard and he passed. So here we have three different clauses. The first one, the dependent, starts with the subordinator though. This is the dependent clause because without the remaining of the sentence, it does not make sense. The other two clauses are both independent. He worked very hard and he passed. Those are two independent clauses which can be standalone sentences. In the second example, while I was sleeping, comma, my daughter had a nightmare, comma, so she woke up. Again, if you notice here, the dependent sentence, the dependent clause starts with the subordinator while. and on its own, it would not make sense. So it needs the remainder of the sentence in order to make sense. The two independent clauses, my daughter had a nightmare, comma, so she woke up. Those two clauses, if I were to take those two out and put them on a sentence on their own, they would make a correct sentence, and it would be a compound sentence since it's a combination of two independent clauses. Now, in the final example, the order is reversed. Some were crying, comma, and others were waving goodbye, comma, as the train left. So here we have the final clause is the dependent. So it's put at the end of the sentence. Some were crying and others were waving goodbye as the train left. So again, we have two independent and one dependent, and that's another way to create a compound complex sentence.